And a particular welcome to Alex and Becky, who have returned to the fold after maternity leave, is that right? Welcome back. Also, it is National Golf Lovers Day today. So, Derek, thank you so much for being here. But I'm sure you'll be able to get the back nine in this afternoon. Welcome, then, to this meeting of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority being held at our headquarters at Eastleigh. The meeting is being recorded for broadcast on the authority's website and will be available for repeated viewings. The press and members of the public are also permitted to film and broadcast this meeting. Those remaining at the meeting are consenting, therefore, to be filmed and recorded.
Colonel Ford, Councillor Harrison,
and Karen Luciani from
Karen Luciani.
Right. Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any? None? Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority meeting from the 26th of July. I'll just go through it. Page 3, anything? Page 4, anything? I would just like to point out that on page 4, paragraph 108, members' developments, I think is really impressive about the work that you've been doing, everything, which is, I thank you for, and we must keep that going. Page 5, page 6. Okay, thank you. I will sign those. Item 4, any deputations? Don't think so, no? Fine. Item 5, Chairman's announcements. On behalf of the authority, on the passing of our late Queen, we sent our condolences to the royal family, which I passed a copy on to you. Did you all get that? Who passed away at Balmoral Castle on the 8th of September. Following a formal request from National Resilience Fire Control, the fire service deployed a team of 18 colleagues to provide support for the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service on the day of the state funeral. We also stood up a detection, identification and monitoring unit in London to cover the event. A team of 6 specialist responders, a DIM vehicle and support of plants was based out of Chiswick Fire Station for the duration of the event last Monday. Our swift response to support other fire and rescue services during this extraordinary time and the ongoing commitment of our colleagues demonstrates how we continue to deliver our purpose to making people's lives better. Chief, anything to add?
Thank you, Chairman, and just to echo your points, thank you to the service for stepping up into those places during this difficult time for the country and mourning. And the proclamation services obviously across the county, which many of you were at, and many of our officers were attending on behalf of the Fire and Rescue Service, as is in line with our normal procedures. As you say, the emergency cover was provided outside the county as well as within, but there was a whole lot of civic arrangements in place which were all long-term planned for and all went as well as they possibly could. So I'm grateful for all the staff for their work in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Next item, inspection update. As you'll be aware, the service was inspected earlier this year and some initial findings were shared with the service leadership team in late June. Subsequently, the service has provided the inspectorate with more evidence and information and is now awaiting the draft report to be received, likely later this month. After the service reviews the report to confirm its factual accuracy, the report will be published on their website by the inspectorate, most likely in January next year. Prior to being published, the report will be under embargo and cannot be shared with all members. When further updates are available, the service will update members and then plans to take any required action to the Standards and Governance Committee for consideration in 2023. Chief, anything to add?
Just to reassure members as well, I know it seems a long way, it does seem to us a long way away from the actual inspection to when results come. Obviously, we'll be getting insights and we'll be preparing ourselves for either pushing back on the factual accuracy issues or dealing with the things we know which are coming in the report, which obviously we can discuss in general terms, but we can't share the actual report until it's published. But we'll certainly have conversations with you about that.
Okay, thank you. Next bit, pay offers and potential industrial action. Members will be aware that several trade unions across the UK are either considering or undertaking industrial action on the basis of cost of living and current pay offers. The Fire Authority has stated that we think our teams should be paid appropriately for the important roles that they play in our community. The Fire Brigades Union has indicated it will ballot its members during the next few weeks, whereas the Fire and Rescue Services Association and Fire Officers Association have no plans for such action. While we want an agreed outcome with a sustainable level of pay for our fantastic staff, it is outside our control and can only be resolved via the NJC. The service is now working on its plans to continue delivering our vital public services during periods of reduced staff availability. The Chief and I attended a meeting last week, an LGA meeting, discussing this whole area of pay. And one of the questions that we were asked was, you know, as a fire authority and as a fire service, what can you afford? We said, because you know, we are trying very hard for our firefighters and staff, we said we could afford 5%. But as we were reminded by Moneybags over there that we can't carry on like this. And next year will be pretty uncomfortable unless we get help from the government. Would that be a fair summary? Thank you. So, you know, we are fighting for our firefighters and staff. Roger.
Mr. Chairman, as we meet here today, is that I understand that the negotiations in London are going on today. The meeting today is with the Pay Review Board, and today is I think, probably going to be the crunch day, because whatever the decision is, whether the unions accept it or not, I don't know.
Okay, thanks. We wait with bated breath. Chief?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. And as you'd imagine, just to remind the Fire Authority, the duty remains on the Fire Authority during strike periods to continue to provide a fire and rescue service in line with the law, and obviously that duty then transfers to me and my team. And so as you'd imagine, we are making plans and in the hope that industrial action can be averted and an agreement being reached today or in the near future. But there's still time. Deputy Chief and her team, and in fact the entire senior team, are working with those across the service to make sure we can provide the best service we possibly can, albeit clearly when staff remove their labour, we are much diminished in that regard. Our approach to this is very much balanced in line with our values, and we recognise people's rights to withdraw their labour should they wish to, and we'll support them in the same way as we do any other members of our staff, because what I'm most interested in is make sure that our working environments are safe, fair and reasonable for people to operate in. So, but clearly we have a responsibility to provide that fire rescue service, which we will do in some way or another. And obviously, if that sadly comes to pass, I'll make sure I keep you cited on our plans to provide the very best service we can during that period.
Thanks. Is anyone being irritated by this echo? No? Okay, good. Right, next one, launch of the Fire Cadets on the Isle of Wight. The island's very first unit has been launched at Sandown Fire Station in September, and new cadets and community volunteers can sign up now. Run by Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service, the programme gives those aged between 13 and 17 the chance to gain essential social, life and well-being skills, including a BTEC Level 2 qualification. Fire Cadets is perfect for young people looking to have fun whilst taking on challenges to reach their full potential. Whether taking part in firefighting drills and first aid training or using real firefighting equipment, from the moment they put on their cadet uniforms, they become part of the fire service family. As well as having the chance to make new friends, learn teamwork skills and improve health, fitness and well-being, the cadets also practice interview skills to help them with future applications and curriculum vitae. The fire service is also looking to recruit volunteer fire cadet instructors from the local community to support the new cadets on their journey, helping them to fulfil their potential and playing a part in building stronger and healthier communities. Chief?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, next year there'll be a briefing paper around this, but you may know already from your local authority connections that local authorities and indeed fire and rescue services will be holding statutory holders of the serious violence duty. And one of our particular weapons that we can use against serious violence is educating and connecting our youngest people. And so Fire Cadets is yet another scheme which will allow us to step into that space to support our policing colleagues and indeed generally make our communities safer places. So very much in line with our core duties now, but will further sort of support our contribution to those duties coming next year also.
Thank you. Okay, item 6, members' developments. I can report that on the 28th of July I achieved a feat which I don't think has ever happened before. I went to the Prince's Trust in the Isle of Wight, which is their first one, and then in the evening I went to a Prince's Trust in Basingstoke. I hope you're impressed. Which was really a good big event. The Lord Lieutenant was there, the Mayor of Basingstoke was there. It was a really, really good event. So anybody else want to tell us what they've been doing in members' developments? Zoe?
Thank you. Yes, since we last met, I attended Redbridge Prince's Trust presentation, and like you, Ridian, it was fantastic to see the skills that they achieved, whether or not that was firefighting or some of the community skills that they achieve under Prince's Trust. Under my champion role for the children and young people, I also met with the leadership team to understand more about the services under children and young people, so that was on the 8th of August. And then under my role as champion for performance, I met with Councillor Price and Santra. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Anybody else? Cal?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess since the last meeting, just wanted to report back that I've signed up with others to attend the LGA Fire Leadership course, which I think has taken place in November. There's a few hours going up to that, so I'm looking forward to attending and meeting fire authority members from around the country and learning a little bit more about their experiences and different roles around the country. Also continue to be in regular contact with the Fire Brigades Union to understand from their perspective issues that are affecting the workforce. Of course, kind of top of the agenda at the moment, as has been discussed, is the pay issue. The current offer, as I'm sure everyone knows, of 2% is well behind inflation, so it's a massive real terms pay cut, and people are really kind of worried and anxious about the impact that's going to have on them and their families. So hopefully some progress can be made at a national level. I know, as has been discussed, the NGC meeting today, hopefully an offer can be brought forward that is acceptable to staff and then prevents any further impacts on services through industrial action. I've also met with Councillor Hughes and officers through the sustainability role to talk about some ongoing issues and progress that is being made within the authority and the service. I believe we've got a site visit planned in the coming future to attend one of the stations to look in person at some of the work that's being done. And then lastly, I know that last time round there was some discussion about Cosham and the new station that's proposed there and some kind of issues around the property deal there. So I have engaged with my home authority, Portsmouth, with Chief Executive and senior officers to try and ensure that they were doing everything that could be to get that resolved. As far as I know, and I'm hoping that has now all been resolved, but do let me know if that's not the case.
Thank you, Carl. Anyone else? Roger, please.
Mine's on the Fire Management Service Committee, which met on the 23rd of September. One of the things there was the fire finance, and it was said that 1% increase in pay costs £14 million across the English authorities. So that's what an increase will cost. There's also one of the other things which was said there was the economic social value of the UK Fire Service. Now that one of the big arguments that the fire service as a whole have had when negotiating with the relevant department that they were under at the time, they could never prove how much their value was, what they were, for every pound spent, what they were, the benefits were. And for the first time, as I know of anyway, that we had a presentation by the Deputy Chief of Shropshire, who was doing the work on behalf of the NFCCC, about community risk management and a plan for that with a toolkit. And that was to be a report put out last week, because the week after the meeting. And what it was saying, that for every £1 spent in the fire service, £6.17 is in benefit is obtained. There's going to be 2 workshops next year for the fire chiefs, and it's also being launched in the fire magazine. Now, I'm not quite sure when the fire magazine comes out, whether it's come out or it's to come out, but I think it's something which is very good, because from the national negotiators, when arguing for money, will be in a better position to say, well, this is the benefit for every pound we put in, this is the benefit to the community, which we've never been able to do before, and it's always been the question asked of the fire service in negotiations for money. The police have something similar. I don't think it's the same, but something similar. They could always prove that how, for every pound they spent, what the benefit to the community was, and it was always thrown back at us. So I think this is a major step forward for the future. There are a lot of other things which they were all pushed through or nodded through on the reports, but that was the main thing, other than to say that the local government conference for 23 is in Nottingham, and that's the 7th and the 8th of March.
Thank you, Roger. Tony.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, could I ask Roger, if you have that information, were you able to share it with other members? Because that's really interesting.
Yeah, I can send out an email if you like.
Yeah.
But normally just report it back here, the meetings that one attends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I attended also the Princess Trust graduation at Redbridge, which was a grand evening. I found it quite moving. As part of my wider induction and part of my People Champion role, I spent 2 hours in the control room, something I would commend to all Fire Authority members as an insight into the way the whole situation is managed and overseen and knits together. I've met with the Chief Fire Officer, glad to accept his invitation to do that as part of my role as the Labour lead. I've met with Molly Rowland, the Director of HR and Organisational Development, as part of my People Champion role, which was very insightful for me. And I would go on record to say how impressed I was with the welfare offer to our staff that goes on, and the comprehensive nature of that. I am booked to meet with the lead officer in Southampton, talk about issues local to Southampton, and that's coming up. I'm also with Cal and Karen Lucioni, booked on the LGA leadership course for Fire Authority members. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Derek.
Thank you, Chair. I too attended the Princess Trust evening in Basingstoke, which I took as a great success. My fire leadership course was, of course, cancelled by the LGA, and I will be rebooking on the first available. Unfortunately, because of county council matters, I can't attend the one in November, so it'll probably be the January one now. Additionally, outside the standard meetings, we had 2 very good briefings, I thought. One-on-one with Karen Shaw on the audit matters, which is particularly relevant, especially as the last governance meeting we had no internal audit matters to report on. So, and also on organisational risk, I have a better understanding of the organisation as such and how it interacts with each department here, following Stephen Polly's advice. Other than that, nothing to add.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, members. Excellent stuff. Right. Any comments, Chief? Item 7 then, on page 9 in your paperwork, which is the budget update. So I would invite Catherine Edgecombe to introduce your report, please.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and good morning, members. So this is a budget update report, and I think paragraph 5 of the report is really important for the context of this report. It's providing an update about some assumptions, some risks and potential mitigations relevant to the authority's financial position. And this is particularly important during this period of substantial economic uncertainty. And it's just worth emphasising that this report isn't necessarily asking the authority to take any action, it's providing an update. So the first matter to consider is inflation. So normally we would talk overall about the budget monitoring position, but I've specifically drawn out inflation because this is such a big impact on our position this year. During the budget setting process, we were aware of rising inflation rates, and we did what we could to build in some additional allowances to mitigate the risk of inflation. So we put in an additional inflation contingency, and we also increased our pay inflation budgets. And the council tax flexibility that we were given as an authority was a factor in enabling us to do this. So we are in, I would say, a relatively good position. But as the table in paragraph 7 attempts to illustrate, we have got additional excess inflation of £1.3 million. So that is following the normal amount of inflation we put in and the use of the inflation contingencies. We've got excess inflation of 1.3 million. And as paragraph 9 sets out, a major driver of this in non-pay is energy costs. Now, this report was published, or was certainly prepared, prior to the announcement of the government's support for energy costs. Actually, we've done some work with our property services team, and we actually aren't going to benefit from any of that government support. But in some ways, this is a good news story for us. Because of our method of buying energy is that we do bulk purchases in advance, the price we've secured is actually lower than the cap. So this, although it would be helpful to receive some support, this position shows that we have actually managed the risk of rising inflation by the way that we're buying our energy. So there is, this is the pressure, we're not going to receive any support. So then I go on to talk a little bit about pay inflation and some pressures within the position. Now, as the Chairman mentioned in the introduction, pay awards are unclear for both staff and firefighters. And so this position assumes that the staff pay award is agreed as currently offered, and that the eventual resolution to the firefighters' pay award is a 5% increase. And that isn't intended to be a comment on the outcome of any negotiation. It's just to give us a prudent position. So if I forecast currently 2% pay award for firefighters, I think that really does understate the potential pay award. So it would look, we'd look in a much better position, but I just don't think that's the right thing to do at the moment. I think so we're forecasting a 5% pay award for firefighters. But it's just really important to note that none of that has been agreed, either for the staff pay award or the firefighter pay award. So these are all just currently assumptions. So then moving on from that inflation section, we just look at then the overall monitoring position. And given the levels of inflation, it is really pleasing to note that we are still forecasting a small underspend of just over £600,000. This underspend is likely to reduce though, because this was the Q1 position, and that was prior to the exceptionally busy period over the summer. So we are likely to see this underspend reduce. And the reason that despite these inflationary pressures, there's still an underspend is mainly to do with some quite significant one-off underspends. So the pressure is ongoing and the in-year mitigations are one-off. So in particular, we have got an underspend on our capital financing costs because we haven't yet borrowed for externally for the station investment programme, but we will still need to do that. So that is a one-off underspend, it's not money that's available. We've also got some additional income from our investments. Again though, as we spend our reserves, that investment income will reduce because we just won't have as much money. So that isn't something that we can bank on for the future either. So but it is still a good news position in that despite these pressures, we are still forecasting a small underspend this year. So it won't be necessary for us to draw from reserves currently to balance the budget in this year. So then the next section of the report talks about the forward impact, on the impact of this year's position on next year. And this is where we start to sort of venture into really quite a lot of assumptions about both inflation and funding. So it is worth just highlighting again that we really are in a period of certainly within my work memory, a period of unprecedented uncertainty. So it is really difficult for us to make assumptions. So what I've attempted to do is to make prudent assumptions that sort of set out a reasonable worst case, although it is fair to say that because of the pace of developments at the moment, I can't necessarily be completely confident that this really is the worst case scenario. So in paragraph 25, I've set out the assumptions that we've used in this position. And so, and particularly I think what it's worth noting is that I'm forecasting inflation for non-pay and pay to continue at an elevated rate, but particularly for non-pay not as high as it has been this year. So I'm assuming that inflation does reduce, and that is in line with current forecasts. I've also assumed that no additional support for inflation is provided by government, and that is in line with current messaging, and that also that the council tax referendum limit remains at 1.99% for fire authorities, and that the fire authority will propose and agree to an increase at that level. And so the appendix to the report sort of tries to compare what did we think the position would be in 23-24 when we set the budget in February with what we now think the position is. And that now shows a deficit which is larger than the grant equalisation reserve, which is the money we have set aside to deal with in-year deficits. So it's I think that's a really key point I'm trying to highlight with this report at the moment, to say that we would be looking, if all these assumptions pan out, at a reasonable deficit next year. Again, it's worth reiterating that there are a lot of assumptions, and it's unlikely that all of these assumptions will be correct. It's also worth pointing out that we do have a very strong mitigation in place if this were to be the position. So what we would do is we would fully use the grant equalisation reserve balance, which is held to mitigate against the risk of funding shortfalls, and then we would have to reduce our contribution to reserves temporarily. So this would mean that in the future, we would likely incur higher borrowing costs because we would need to replace that reserve contribution with borrowing. But it would mean that we were in a position to set a balanced budget for next year, and we would have time to then plan for the necessary actions to balance the budget in the medium term. So we wouldn't be in a position where we get the settlement in December and we would need to take action to reduce our spend by March in order to set a balanced budget. So although it is a very difficult position, we have got a mitigation in place that would allow us to set a balanced budget for next year. I suppose it's also just worth flagging that this report didn't take into account the impact of the return to previous levels of national insurance. So we're not clear whether that money will stay with fire and rescue services or whether there'll be a funding cut to offset the difference. But in any case, that's about £350,000, the impact on us as a service. So although it would obviously be really beneficial, it's just one of many factors that may change and actually have changed since this report was published. It's also worth, I'm sure everyone's aware of this anyway, but it's also really worth highlighting that these pressures aren't unique to us as a fire authority, or unique to the fire sector, or unique to the public sector. So these are issues that are affecting all public sector bodies and private companies currently. So we're part of a bigger national and international picture. The final section of the report just provides a very brief update on the delivery of the in-year efficiency savings. So the majority of these efficiencies will come from within the Operations Directorate, and we're on track to deliver those this financial year. So in summary, this report sets out our position for this year, which shows a challenging position this year, but we are currently forecasting to be able to come in slightly underspent this year, and it sets out the great deal of uncertainty we're facing for next financial year. So we will bring a further update to this position to the December Fire Authority, and we may well have some more information to give us a slightly more concrete position. The government has, I think, now been clear that there won't be a multi-year spending review. So we were expecting a 2-year spending review, but I think we are now back to a single-year funding settlement for next year. So although hopefully for the December report we'll have some more certainty and we will need to have certainty for the February budget report about next year's position, we will still be in the position of only seeing our funding 1 year in advance. So I'm really happy to take any questions.
Catherine, thank you. Thank you. Any questions, members? Yeah, stunned in silence. Keith. Keith.
Yeah, I just would like to know exactly where we are. Sorry.
Where we are is regarding our energy use and the increase in costs, and specifically how the help the government have given to businesses affect us, if it does at all.
So we are monitoring energy really closely because obviously that is a big pressure. Because of the way that we buy our energy in a bulk purchase with other Hampshire partners, we've prepaid at the start of the year at a rate that is lower than the level at which government provides support. So we are in effect already below that level for government support. So although we have got this large pressure, because of the way we've managed our energy purchasing, the pressure isn't as bad as it could have been, so we aren't actually going to benefit from the government support. So I suppose it's disappointing we're not going to benefit from the government support, but it is good that we have taken action ourselves to insulate ourselves from the very worst effects of the energy price rises.
So what you're saying is that we are paying for our energy at the moment below the capped price the government have provided for either business or individuals. Presumably, though, that will change at the beginning of the new financial year quite dramatically, because clearly the bulk buy will take account of the price then rather than the price last year, or earlier this year, I should say.
So my understanding is that the energy team are doing work on the forward pricing as well, and so I don't have the detailed answers on the impact on next year. The government support is currently for the 6-month period to March, so it could be that when we come to repurchase, we are then, if there is any further support, we're eligible for that support. But I know that the energy team here and with support from colleagues at the county are working closely on this. So I don't have an answer yet for the exact position for energy pricing for next year.
My view is that obviously there's going to be a steep increase. We can't rely upon the government to bail out any percentage of it, so it would be useful to know sooner rather than later what the situation is likely to be next year, because I suspect there's going to be a big change.
Derek.
A bit of a follow-on actually from Councillor Manns, but I'm always a little uncomfortable in such uncertain times in terms of interest rates and everything else that you emphasise this, Catherine, that we're going to be borrowing to budget, borrowing to the future to budget for the current. Is this a safe policy when we don't really know what we can expect past 23-24? Apologies.
So it's a very good question. It's probably worth clarifying that point. So the question about borrowing would be that we would remove some of our revenue contributions to capital and borrow for capital purposes. So we wouldn't be allowed to borrow for revenue purposes. That's not legal, and it wouldn't be allowed under the code. We are very aware of interest rate pressures, and we are doing significant work, which we'll bring back to the authority in December to look at our current capital commitments and future programme, and to consider that in light of the new conditions for borrowing. So that is definitely a factor. We wouldn't want to have to reduce our reserve contributions to balance the position. That's sort of in our financial principles. We kind of hold that as a last resort to buy us the time to be able to make sensible decisions about how to bridge funding gaps. So it's definitely not something that we would want to do, but it is kind of our backup plan if it turns out that we do end up with an adverse settlement with insufficient time to plan how to address it in the medium term. So we wouldn't necessarily assume we would continue the capital programme the same and borrow. We would have to look at the capital programme alongside all of our revenue commitments to work out how to best balance the budget.
Just as a bit of a supplementary then onto that, is there any thought of looking for an increase in the precept next year? We had £5 this year, correct? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we would be bound by government on that. So it's not a decision. The only way that we could currently increase a precept by more than 1.99% would be to hold a referendum. And I think previous work indicated that the cost of a referendum is about £1 million. So the first 2% of any rise would only cover the cost of a referendum. So I think it's very unlikely we would go down that route. But we are, as with the rest of the fire sector, engaging with the government so that they understand the position that we're in.
Thank you. Very good report. Thank you.
Roger and then Gary.
Mine is more of a comment than a question. Certainly, I think Catherine needs to be congratulated on this report because all the balls are up in the air and nobody knows where they're going to fall. That's the problem. The government, they make a decision one week, change it the next week. We don't know what's going to be there. We need to get more money from the government in the way of grant to support the fire service. And I think that what is being done by the NFCCC is a step in that right direction to try and persuade the government the need for money in the service of what we provide to the community. The problem is you can't keep on putting up the council tax because the people out there are hard strapped for cash equally as much, if not more, than what we as a fire authority are. So, okay, you might get the permission to have a £5 increase, but I think you've got to be very careful. £5 from the fire authority is a very small amount. But when you add it on to what the county charges and what the boroughs charge, and in the two cities as well, that then makes the large figure which they have to find. And so you can't keep on doing that. So I think that somewhere along the line, and if you look at it over the years, the reduction which we've had in real terms to the fire service is being the problem. The government has got to put the right amount of money in. The government's policy is to take taxation away from the government and put it onto local authorities and what have you, which is a really retrograde step through an archaic system of raising that. And I think that where we now will hopefully next year have a very good way of proving to the government what our worth is, we'll be able to get the money out of them to provide the services which we actually need and everybody needs. Sorry, my rant.
It's okay. Thank you. Gary.
Thank you, Chairman. Catherine, thank you for the very honest and pragmatic report. Two things I made. I strongly recommend you don't go down the referendum route. I think only one authority in the country has ever done that, which was Bedfordshire. It cost a lot of money and the voters rejected it. So it was not successful in any circumstance. In terms of the precept, would it be a government announcement that would allow authorities, and I'm very conscious of what Councillor Price just said, in terms of going from 1.99% to a £5 limit? Is that a central government decision? And if that decision came, would that be a recommendation coming to this authority?
I think given that the pressures we're facing, if there were no other support for inflation, I think it would something we'd need to consider very carefully because the alternative would have to be cuts to services. It would be a government decision. And I do completely agree with you that the referendum, it's particularly in the current climate, it's very unlikely that people are going to vote to pay more tax. So I think it would be unadvisable to do that. So I think we would need to seriously consider the option of increasing the precept if that was the lever we were given to balance our position. Currently, there is just a great deal of uncertainty. But yeah, I think we would need to consider it, but very much taking on board Councillor Price's comments about the fact that this would be another increase on people who are also struggling with exactly the same pressures that the Fire Authority is dealing with.
I'm allowed to make a comment, if I may. I think the energy price rises that we've seen recently, everything I read in the market suggests that they're going to come down anyway. The costs it would be a very reasonable assessment to make. So hopefully the circumstances we find ourselves in now will not be the same situation we find ourselves in March next year. So I do hope that offers a small olive branch of hope for when we do the budget setting process.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to Catherine for her work on this. I guess to reassure the authority, the hand-in-glove arrangements of not only your financial strategies but also the service provision strategies, and that sense of reviewing, keeping under sharp focus the things that we've said we would do. Bear in mind the kind of forward costs of some of those things at the moment and whether a delay or a change would be useful. So constant review is happening amongst the senior team to offer you the best guidance and advice. Another thing to say is the lobbying that Councillor Price points out also from the National Fire Chiefs Council and in other areas also about proper funding for fire and rescue services. The challenge we have is our Home Department is the Home Office, but the budget holder is DLUC, which is the local government office, and they both need to convince the Treasury. So you can imagine we've got a three-way journey to go through in our particular lobbying, which gets lost in the mist of time and conversation. So there is a real challenge at hand. That said, the work that recently has been done around the economic value, but also the Home Office's recognition that many services are really up against it. Now, I wouldn't count ours as one of those. We do need help, but there are many services that are right up against the line now and will not cope well in the coming years if something isn't done in that regard. So wouldn't want to name them here, but nonetheless we are in a position where we're not at the forefront of that difficult line because of the prudent line we've taken in the past in our financial planning. So that planning continues, and I'm delighted that Catherine's presented that to you today, and it relies on us being forward-thinking enough to be able to be ahead of the game best we can in running these difficult organisations. Thank you, Chairman.
Anybody else? Catherine, thank you for your report of excellent clarity. Very good. Thank you. Okay, so moving to page 15 of your paperwork, the recommendations are that the forecast outturn position for the financial year 22-23 be noted by the full authority, that the forecast impact of current high levels of inflation on the forecast 23-24 budget be noted by the full authority. So those first two to be noted. Yeah. And the last one, that the proposal to closely monitor the in-year and medium-term position and use reserve contributions to close any budget gaps in the short term be approved by the full authority. Approved? Good, thank you. So moving to item 8 on page 19 of your paperwork. The minutes of the Standard and Governance Committee meeting on the 29th of July 2022. If I can ask the chairman of that committee for comment.
Of course, Chair, since the July meeting, true to our efficiency, we've already had another meeting, of course, which is not yet minuted. Suffice to say, I've got nothing to add really as to what is in the minutes on the annual assurance statement in particular, and the government statements. They were as per, so I've got nothing to add to this particular item of these minutes.
Okay, thank you. Members, any comments on the minutes? So we agree those minutes? Agree. Okay. And lastly, we have item 9, which is a blue bit. It's an exclusion one, but we have, as an authority, discussed that issue. So I would ask you then if you note that paper. Okay.
Where are we?
Great, thank you. Good. Chief, any comments before we... You must do, yeah, you said yes. No. Time up.
8 to 10.
Okay. Members, just to round the meeting off with good news, you'll be aware that, you may not be aware, but there's an organisation called United Kingdom Rescue Organisation. It's a charity which operates in this country for extrication, rope rescue, water rescue. And Hampshire and Wight puts teams in every year, and once again we did this year. I happen to be the chairman of the organisation, but that doesn't. I don't have any standard marking, I would add, of the assessment. So it's essentially, if I could sort of kind of phrase, it's a bit like Formula One pit crews that have to sort of fuel cars very quickly and be very efficient. Same is true for things like vehicle extrication, where people are trapped in cars, or rope rescue, where people are trapped at height. And water rescue. So the teams are assessed by international assessors, and they are in essential competition on how well they do. So our outcome results, our medic team came second in the UK, which is fantastic. We came top in the heavy rescue team category, and our rope rescue team came, did I say rope rescue? Second as well. So we had some really good results there from our teams, and congratulations to them for taking part. A few days over in Birmingham, taking part and learning lots from other organisations. Very useful input from really modern challenges like electronic vehicles and battery-powered equipment. So some real learning there, which we spread across the organisation and will make a difference to our communities on the front line out there every day. So it's one of those, whilst it's a competition and fun, actually we're learning lots and making sure we're as best as and as good as anybody else, if not better. So that's a fantastic thing. We also had the great opportunity of getting a team over from the Ukraine, and the charity made sure that happened, supported by a number of other services. And I was delighted to receive a gift from them to recognise the contribution that we'd made to their moment over here, taking part in the challenge. They didn't actually, they did quite well. Actually, they beat some British teams, which is fantastic to see. But the bravery of those Ukrainian firefighters is quite up to behold. The awkward moment when they spelled my name wrong on a presentation, but nonetheless, it was well received, and great that our teams took part. We're part of an international movement there, and all for the benefit of our communities out there to keep them safe. Thank you, Joe.
Ladies and gentlemen, officers, anything else? Members? Roger.
Mr. Chief, on the competition in Birmingham, do all teams have the same equipment to be competing with, or do we learn that other authorities or the services have different equipment, and therefore we can learn from that and start thinking about that? Or do they, so as a competition, you should be equals in starting that competition. So do they all have the same equipment or not?
That's a really good question. So the main equipment suppliers are there. It's one of their kind of obviously days out for their celebrating their kit. And the good thing about it, it's a great test. So if one bit of kit is clearly better than another bit of kit, it will be obvious in the competition. So the other competitive manufacturers would go, we need to do what they're doing. So it does drive not only supply of the right equipment, but also the skills of the firefighters. So it's a good mix of suppliers and equipment and skills of people. There's also medical and clinical assessments of our team's skills as well. So it's quite unique in what it does. We're trying to do the same thing for even firefighting, because all technical skills, there is a Bring That Back challenge, which is slightly separate. But there's lots of things we can do about that. And now, of course, there's accreditation from the Institution of Fire Engineers, so our firefighters can become qualified as a technical engineer level by taking part in these challenges and qualifying to those levels. So I think it's great news. I would say that other charities are available, of course, but we do, as an authority, support the UKRO in what it does. We've had a long affiliation with them. In fact, we've been the world champions once as well. So it's a great thing to do, because it genuinely drives the benefit for our people out in the communities.
Okay, there being no further business, we close at 11:20. Thank you very much.